Hi, good morning. Can I request you all to settle down? We'll be on our way soon with this morning's program. And let me welcome all of you to the inaugural edition of Tackling Insurgent Ideologies, ORF initiative with our partners from Facebook, British High Commission, the Swiss Embassy, and the Geneva Center to bring thinkers and practitioners and academics together to discuss one of the most important challenges of certainly our times. Yesterday we had a good opener with the Indian Minister of State, Mr. M.J. Akbar, speaking from an Indian vantage point on this crucial question. We also had a very interesting panel discussion thereafter, which threw up some very interesting ideas and also provocations that we will engage with over the next 2 days. And this morning, we will hear from another very special speaker, Baroness Williams of Trafford. She is the UK Minister of State for Countering Extremism. She's been a Conservative member of the House of Lords. Baroness Williams was a member of Trafford Metropolitan Borough Council between 1998 and 2011, and she was raised to peerage in 2013. She has previously served as the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Department of Communities and Local Government between May 2015 and July 2016. The British experience is extremely important to what we have been discussing yesterday evening and what we will engage with today and tomorrow. I think they have two interesting elements, somewhat controversial. The Guardian has not been very charitable to some of their experiments with responding to violent extremism online especially. But many countries seem to be more attracted to that model than the British themselves are. And this is something uniquely British, that you create things that others run with, and while you have your own guilt and conversations that bog you down. But let me mention two of them. One, of course, is the Prevent program, the big umbrella program, and how they are making sure that the Muslim youth and the minority community youth are protected from the potential radicalization processes. And they have a whole basket of tools that they are deploying. And of course, some of them involve counter-narratives and counter-messaging, and which is again something that was highlighted in recent reports around that program. But they also have a second element, which is the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, which takes down content which is pro-terrorism and pro-radicalization. So I think they are, in a sense, approaching this from two directions, going after the bad guys and protecting the good guys. And this particular effort was criticized by some as censorship and propaganda working together, government propaganda and government censorship working together online. And I personally disagree with that assessment. I think that's a very useful model. All of us can fit it into our own legislative arrangements, and we can make sure that they are constitutionally sound. But the idea that content which is offensive and which is going to radicalize must be taken down is a sound idea. How we do it needs to be as per laws of the land that we operate within, and certainly counter messaging, government assisted, government catalyzed, government enabled, depending on the kind of societies we live in, there is a role for government. And while you may say it is propaganda, but so is what the bad guys do. So I think these two dimensions of the British approach to one aspect of countering violent extremism, for me as a student of media, is an extremely useful subject, and I'm sure the Baroness would shed some light on the bigger British proposition that all of us can engage with over the next 2 days. So without any further ado, let me invite Baroness Williams to deliver the keynote this morning. Ma'am.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Samir, and for initially describing the British quite perfectly, beating ourselves up about things we do well. But it's an absolute honour to be here this morning, and any of you who were here for the session yesterday evening, as Samir said, will have heard some very compelling speeches and some great contribution from some of the panellists, which is a great warm-up for today and for the next 3 days. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. May I first start by reflecting on the strength and the importance of the partnership between our two countries, the UK and India. We are bound together by personal, professional, cultural and institutional ties. We have a shared interest in each other's prosperity, generating jobs, developing skills, and enhancing the competitiveness of the UK's and the India economy. Our business links are strengthened by the people-to-people links between our countries, what is now described as a living bridge. We both have a history of democracy, India having the largest democracy in the world and UK having the oldest democracy in the world. We recognise that diversity and cohesion creates a much safer and prosperous society. These long-standing historical ties are, of course, also the foundation on which we cooperate on counter-terrorism and extremism issues. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. As the UK's Minister for Countering Extremism, I want to take the opportunity to look beyond counter-terrorism and instead focus on our approach to identifying and countering extremism in the UK. So I'll focus this morning on three main areas. First of all, what we mean by extremism in the UK. Second of all, the progress that we've made towards tackling extremism since we published our counter-extremism strategy in 2015. And thirdly, the importance of our shared work on counter-terrorism, the most harmful of all forms of extremism. I can't think of many issues that we face today which are actually more serious or more important for society than tackling extremism. But it's important that I'm clear at the outset that the UK do not consider extremism and terrorism as the same thing. Of course, extremists use narratives to tragically radicalise young Britons to join terrorist groups like Daesh, but radicalisation into terrorism is not the only harm of extremism. Extremists also use their twisted narratives to justify hatred and division, to spread intolerance, isolate communities, and erode the rights of women and minorities. Our strategy defines extremism as the vocal and active opposition to our fundamental values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and the mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. It's a complex issue. We must balance the rights of individuals to practice a faith or their right to free speech, law-abiding campaigning and nationalism like we've seen closer to home with Scottish nationalism, for example, is acceptable in our democracy. But we will act decisively to disrupt extremist activity where our legal thresholds are broken and where individuals are crossing that line, whether that's by inciting hatred or violence towards others. The threat that we face from extremists is quite unprecedented. The internet is enabling them to spread their ideologies at a pace and scale that we have never seen before. It also gives them access into every single family home. Last year, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, spoke about there being too much tolerance of extremism in the UK, and that is still the case today, but it cannot continue. Through our counter-extremism strategy, we're acting now to confront extremism and the extremists in our communities. In Britain, as I'm sure all around the world, there are those who do not share our common values of democracy, the rule of law, and the mutual respect and tolerance of individuals of different faiths and beliefs. As we heard yesterday at the opening session, extremism in all its forms is not something that any government can or should do alone. At the heart of our counter-extremism strategy is a partnership with all those opposed to extremism. We need the help of everyone, local partners, national partners, and international partners, as Samir said in his closing remarks yesterday evening. So this conference provides an opportunity to share our experience of what works when we tackle extremism. I'm delighted to see such a broad range of attendees here, bringing together experts, practitioners, and officials from all over the globe. I look forward to hearing your lessons learned over the coming days. And in this spirit, I'll start by setting out our approach to countering extremism in the UK. In the UK, our strategic approach is based around 4 pillars. The first is vigorously countering extremist ideology, making sure that every part of government is taking action to confront those extremist narratives that run contrary to our shared values. The second is to actively support mainstream voices, especially in our faith communities and civil society. The third is to disrupt the most harmful extremists using all the tools in our armour available to us and prosecuting those who break the law. And the fourth, and the most important outcome, I think, is to build more cohesive communities by tackling segregation and feelings of isolation and alienation, which can provide fertile ground for extremist messages. What Farah talked about yesterday as that feeling of identity being established. So let me be clear, this is not about limiting free speech or about enforcing British values overseas, not at all. It's about ensuring that individuals' freedoms, such as the right of women or minorities to take a full part in society, are protected. It recognises that you don't have to support violence to subscribe to certain intolerant ideas which create a climate in which extremists can flourish. Ideas which oppose basic liberal values such as democracy, freedom, sexual equality, and as Minister Akbar said last night, faith equality too. Ideas which actively promote discrimination, sectarianism, and segregation. And ideas which privilege one identity to the detriment of the rights and the freedoms of others. That's why our strategy takes a comprehensive approach to tackling the ideology of extremism, whether it's violent or non-violent, Islamist or far and extreme right wing. And our strategy doesn't just consider extremism domestically. It recognises that extremism needs to be tackled at source, which on many occasions can be traced overseas. But it's only through close cooperation with trusted allies and partners that we can actually undermine the extremists who wish to do us all harm. Our international work focuses on disrupting the flows of extremist individuals, money and ideologies between the UK and overseas. We are working with international partners to tackle extremism and as a result building resilience and capacity overseas to address the drivers, narratives and enablers of extremism. For example, we are working to support implementation of the United Nations Secretary-General's Action Plan for Preventing Violent Extremism, which frames what all UN member states and agencies are expected to do to tackle violent extremism. The National Action Plan encourages a comprehensive approach which goes beyond the essential security-based counter-terrorism measures by emphasising the important function of preventative steps to address the underlying conditions that drive individuals to radicalise and join violent extremist groups. Adopting such an approach will help drive concerted action across our international community. If I could now touch on some of the key successes that we've seen over the last 2 years in the UK. As I said earlier, it's imperative that the effort to tackle extremism is not just driven by government, but by the whole of society. In Britain, we've developed a flagship programme called Building a Stronger Britain Together, which supports over 160 civil society groups with grants and in-kind support, each one standing up to extremists in their communities. This network listens to issues and experiences from the front line and helps us to learn about innovative and effective local interventions. And I'll give you an example. In Newcastle, which is in the northeast of England, we've worked with the city to break down barriers between communities and celebrate what we have in common. The campaign, Together We Are Stronger, highlights through videos and social media experiences of individuals such as Ali, who moved to the city some years ago from Somalia not being able to speak any English, he now coaches football at Newcastle United. I met some of these individuals when I visited the city in March, and the people I met taught me that whilst individuals may seek to divide us or hold extremist views, Newcastle is a welcoming city that celebrates the contribution of all its different communities. I might say that because I grew up there. The campaign, which will shortly be launching in other cities in the UK, seeks to tackle divisive views by celebrating the diverse and inclusive spirit of the city. We've also established a network of community coordinators to develop the knowledge of extremism locally and identify and support groups challenging extremism in local areas. I have had the opportunity to meet some of the groups and community coordinators that work closely with communities, and I am really struck by their dedication, their passion and their commitment to tackle extremism at the grassroots. Later this year, we will publish a refreshed hate crime action plan, and this will set out more what the government plans to do to tackle hate crime, including anti-Muslim hatred. Our new refreshed action plan will build on the good work that we already have underway. We've also already committed over £3 million of funding to protect places of worship, which could be targeted in hate crime attacks. And nearly 50 Islamic places of worship have received that support. But of course, there's always more that we can and need to do. To step up the fight against extremists, just this year, we established a new independent commission for countering extremism. The commission is crucial to bringing new drive and innovative thinking to all our efforts to tackle extremism. It will chart a new path and has a clear remit to support the government to identify and confront extremist ideology in all its forms, whether it's Islamist or far and extreme right-wing or violent and non-violent. I touched on radicalisation and counter-terrorism, the most harmful form of extremism, but I must say that no one becomes a terrorist from a standing start. It starts with the process of radicalisation. When you look into the details of the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that most of them were influenced by what we would call non-violent extremists. Just last week, the Home Secretary launched our new counter-terrorism strategy, recognising that the threat is evolving in the UK and globally. A marked shift was demonstrated by the appalling attacks in London and Manchester in 2017, which cost the lives of 36 innocent people and changed the lives of so many more. It prompted a fundamental review of the UK's counter-terrorism strategy, also known as Contest, to respond to the scale of the threat and the speed with which plots are now developing. The result is a more agile, flexible and coordinated approach designed to better prevent, detect and disrupt terrorist attacks, and where attacks do get through, to limit the impact and recover swiftly. Both of these strategies are cross-cutting in their approaches, and central to each of them is partnering with all those who share our values at local, at national and at international levels, between government, agencies, the private sector and communities. The next 3 days are a great opportunity for all of us to reflect on the challenge that we all face in our own countries and abroad, to share best practice and to establish how we can and must continue to work together to overcome them. I will conclude by reiterating that defeating extremism in all its forms is not something that any government can or should do alone. We need the help of everyone, and that is why we are committed to working in partnership together. Together we will defeat the extremists and build a stronger, more cohesive global community for our children and our grandchildren and for every generation to come. Thank you.
So we have 10 minutes to bring you all into this conversation. I'm going to request all of you to walk up to the mic, those of you who want to pose a question, to walk up to the mic closest to you, and like Farah did yesterday, I'm going to insist for some female voices to take the lead this morning. So please go to the mic. Benedetta, I'm going to volunteer you if you don't ask a question. But please go ahead, Archana. So I'm just telling you that if you don't raise your hands, I will volunteer your question for you. So pose your question, and we'll collect 3 or 4 of them, and then I will come back to you, Baroness, please.
Show called Smart. My question to you is towards the end. You raised a very important part which I strongly believe in, but I would like you to clarify a bit. You said that radicalization is a process and often led by non-radicalized people. And I think that is very important. Did I get it right?
We'll come back to that. So her question is that you have alluded to the fact that the process of radicalization may be supported by those outside that radicalization process itself. So non-radicalized institutions or actors are actually using this as a tool. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Good morning. My name is Mariam Safi from GROPS in Kabul, Afghanistan. Baroness Williams, my question to you is, you gave us an example of the local initiative that took place where you had newcomers coming in, and then you said, is it Mr. Ali? Now he, coaches a football team and whatnot. So you're definitely showing us how this side of the transformation is taking place by building community cohesion. My question is, on the other side, what sort of transformation is taking place? For instance, newcomers are coming in, they're getting more integrated into the community, UK British community. But is there integration on this side of the field to make them feel more like home? That's my question. Thank you.
Can I ask just a follow-on on that question? When the UK government tries to play up the role of these iconic figures like Mr. Ali, is that problematic? And then does it actually create a new tension between the community that they belong to and the fact that the government is adopting them as an icon of that community? General, sir. Yeah, please.
I think I may not need to come here. My voice is loud enough. My name is General Atta Hasnan. I'm the former commander of the Indian Army in Kashmir. Your Excellency, I was in London a couple of years ago. Always very fascinated with the British model of countering extremism. Even in those days, I was there just after 7/7 had taken place. One issue which always struck me very strongly was that were the British far too free, where was the British democracy actually working against British interests? Because you are a multi-ethnic, multicultural society, multi-religious society today. You have a huge number of immigrants today. And therefore, managing that is always a challenge. Therefore, do you think at some stage, a little bit, I would say even 5% curbs on freedom of speech can bring about some kind of a effective countering of violent extremism?
You should have seen Maya's face. She has responded to you. But I'm going to allow the Baroness to respond to that. The last question this morning. Someone wants to come in? I saw some. Maya, you wanted to come in? No. You responded to him. That's right. Okay. Benedetta, you want to come in?
I really would like to hear the response.
Okay. Anyone else? Good. So let me just again add something to the last question. The minister mentioned yesterday in his address that sustained democracy is one of the strengths and one of the best responses to the processes of radicalization. And he mentioned India as a counterpoint to some of the other relatively younger nations, and why some regions are doing better. So just to add to the general's point, do you think democracy is fraying at both edges? One, it is not serving the communities the way it should, and second, it is allowing the deviants to game the process of democracy itself. So is it fraying at both the edges? Is that something you see in Britain?
Well, thank you, everyone, for all your questions. Can you all hear me at the back? No? Yes? Yes, great. So radicalisation is a process, was the first question from the lady from the NGO. It is. It's like any process of the person who is being radicalized quite often doesn't know that that is happening to them at the outset. They might see something on social media that is compelling. They might be feeling isolated in their own community. They might feel that they, as Farah said last night, a kind of lack of identity, a lack of hope for their future, and therefore there's a compelling narrative that sucks them in, if you like. So it isn't from a standing start, it is a process. I think you might have a follow-up question. You're shaking your head.
I was saying about non-radicalized people.
Yes.
A process led by non-radicalized people.
Yeah, I mean, is radicalization a process led by non...
Is radicalization a tool in the hands of, say, political people who are not necessarily believers in that same philosophy?
Well, yes, certainly could be. And the thing is, in the UK, we seek to tackle it at an early stage, so that people are signed up to the values that Britain promotes, and not some of the poisonous ideology that the radicalizers promote. The lady from Afghanistan talked about the newcomers to Newcastle. What was the welcome from the communities into which they entered? When you see people as human beings and all that they can achieve, it is so different from when you don't see people as human beings and just see them as a homogenous mass of incomers who somehow might threaten the housing, the communities, jobs in the UK. That's quite often the narrative that comes forward. When they are seen as human beings who want to come to the UK to work, to contribute to society, that takes on such a different complexity in people's minds. And one of the, there was a report last year by a lady called Louise Casey that saw one of the problems of integration as the sheer speed at which the immigrant communities came into the UK, and communities feeling threatened by that, and gradually by this process of enabling immigrants to assimilate into our communities, welcoming them into our communities, seeing what contribution they make to society, all adds to that, promotion of cohesion within our communities. Does it cause tensions when someone who might be an international football superstar starts to promote some of the values that we espouse? No, I don't think it does. I wish we could have more of it, because what it shows is that aspiration, assimilation, and success within the UK is not a respecter of what background you come from, what your faith is. Anyone can do it, and I think that's a great thing to propose. The general from Kashmir asked a compelling question, which is, are we too free? Do we allow people to say too much? Should we start to curb free speech? I think there is a fine line. We strongly promote free speech. There's often been the suggestion that we curb the free press, and we have no intention of ever curbing the free press, despite the fact that it might report all sorts of nonsense. We think it's a central tenet of democracy, but there is a fine line when free speech starts to incite hatred or violence towards others that are other, as was mentioned last night, are different from us. That is when we need to stop some of those feelings from being promoted. Democracy, as Samir pointed out, is a strength. We are so lucky that we have democracy. It's fraying at both ends. Of course, it's one of the things that extremists would seek to do, would be to fray democracy at both ends, because extremists don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe that there are different faiths and beliefs that can be respected. They don't believe in sexual equality, and therefore it is a threat to extremists. we must always believe that democracy is a great thing and never allow it to fray at the edges. And I think that's why we're having this discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, Baroness. Please join me in applauding Baroness's presentation and her responses to our queries.